Okay, we're in Acts chapter 12. We're going to begin at verse 1. We'll look at the first 19 verses. I know it's quite a familiar story, and we probably all know, but we can have a little talk about some bits and pieces of it in a moment. I'll just go through it reasonably quickly, and we can sort of chat about some of the things that come up as well. If we look at this passage, we know what we've looked at over the past few weeks, and all seems to be going reasonably well for the church. If you think about it, the church has even spread to the Gentiles. We saw that last time with Paul taking the message to Cornelius. And there'd been many signs in the early church. Remember how Peter had healed the lame man at the Beautiful Gate. Tabitha had been raised from the dead. And many people had been healed. The numbers in the church was growing at an incredible rate. The disciples were being called Christians now. The big blip was the fact that Stephen had been stoned to death, which was a tragedy if you think about it in the early church, and it's hard for us to get a head around that. But it says, verse 1, it says, now about that time, so when all of this is sort of coming to a head, about that time, verse 1, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some of the church. He was going to persecute the church. And the reason he was going to do this was he wanted to win over the Jews, the Jewish authorities. He wanted the leadership to be on his side. He wanted to maintain stability. So he was prepared to go to great extremes. He didn't care about, the distress it was going to bring to the church, the Christians, the followers of the way. He was more concerned about keeping the Jewish people on side, keeping the peace in the area, and therefore he wouldn't have the Roman authorities on his back. So verses 1 to 3 it says, now about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. Then he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. So it's at the Passover. Now this Herod is Agrippa. He's the grandson of the Herod we read about at Christmas time, or what we call Christmas time, of the Nativity. His grandfather had actually married his own son, so he'd murdered Agrippa's father. He killed him when Agrippa was just 3 years old, and his mother took him. She fled to Rome for safety, and there this Herod grew up really as a playboy. He was a very close friend to Caligula. You can read about that in the history books, and he had quite a lot of influence on him as well. He prevented Caligula doing a lot of bad things in the area of Palestine, as he sort of extended his rule when he became the Caesar. But Agrippa was a clever man. He was very adaptable. He was politically astute. When in Rome, he did as the Romans do. He kept on side there. He kept in favour, if you read the history. But when he came back when he was made king over the Jews, he observed the feasts. He did everything to keep in favour with the Jewish authorities. And he wanted to keep the peace, maintain the peace, in order to sort of be on the right side of the Roman authorities. There's no trouble coming from this area that was under his rule. And, happy Jews, happy Rome, happy days kind of thing, really, no problems. That's what really was his motto, I suppose. But in verse 2, I find is one of the most difficult verses in the whole of the Bible. It's a real difficult verse for me when you read verse 2. It's just one little verse there, one little verse. James, the brother of John, the sons of thunder, the Boanerges, these were two disciples who were on fire, really. And we have this one verse, and it just says, he was put to death by the sword. The death of Stephen, he was a good man, but we don't know much about Stephen until we come upon his death. He got 70 verses. When you come to James, it just seems to be glossed over so quickly. It's just a matter of fact. But he's put to death, Wasn't he important in God's plans? If you think about it, surely he had a big part to play in the early church. Peter gets rescued from prison more than once. He gets spared. And yet James is put to death. You imagine being his brother John and trying to weigh this all up in your head, while this is going. We don't get an explanation as to why this should happen. You know, it's reality, isn't it? The Bible just tells it as it is. He was put to death. It's hard. And I say we've got no explanation. I don't understand. I find that a real hard verse that somebody, I'm sure the church was praying very hard for. You know, they were in earnest prayer for him, just as they are for Peter in the passage we've got here. And yet he's put to death, probably beheaded by the sword. You know, it's an awful thought, really, isn't it? And it's quite hard hitting. But verse 4 says, so when he had arrested him, or Peter, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending him to bring him before the people after the Passover. So Herod postpones Peter's execution because it's Passover, and he knows that the Jewish authorities won't want a trial and an execution during the holiday, you know, during the feast time. So he puts him there, and he's got him sort of completely guarded, locked down. You know, when the festival's over, we'll bring him out, and we'll continue with what I intend to do. And as he does this, the realisation of the whole situation hits the church. Okay, there's a great concern. First of all, it's Stephen, then it's James, and now it's Peter. And you know, and Peter is a leader in the church in Jerusalem. Really, they can't any longer rely on automatic deliverance. It's not what just happened. You know, they've prayed in the past. People haven't automatically been delivered, and so earnest prayer is being made. That's what we read there. Earnest prayer is being made. So Peter was therefore kept in prison, verse 5, but constant prayer was being offered to God for him by the church. And we see as well that Herod is taking no chances, right? Peter is chained to guards. There's guards or sentries on the doors. There's 4 squads, which is 16 men in all. Probably Herod had been alerted to what happened before, that Peter had been, you know, miraculously brought out of the prison and was found preaching in the temple courtyards. And we know the outcome. We know the end of this story. We know it, don't we? And it's quite hard for us to sort of get a sense of the intensity of the situation for the church, for the believers. They don't know what's going to happen to Peter, and they are intensely praying that he might be released. They don't know what the outcome's going to be, but you can imagine the intensity of praying for one of your own who's locked up and probably faces certain death within a day or two. But in verse 6, it says, when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping. So despite all of this, he's likely to be put on trial. He's going to be found guilty, whatever happens, and he's going to be executed. Peter is asleep. He has peace and he's asleep. You know, in the morning it's his trial. He's always going to be found guilty. There's no way he's going to be let off. There's no way out for him. You know, and to outsure that outcome, you've got the authority of Herod. Everything is massed against Peter. Herod's got the power. Herod's got the control. He's got the muscle. He's got the soldiers. You know, they've got the swords. They've got the chains. They've got the prison. They've got the consent of the Jewish authorities. There's no hope for Peter. And on the other end of the spectrum, the other hand, in a room locked away in John Mark's mother's house, you've got this group of believers who are earnestly praying, and their weapon is prayer. The great weapon of the church, prayer. And that's what they're doing. They're buckling down to it. They're praying with all that they have for Peter, who's in prison. You know, they're really, really getting down to it, you know. And it does seem almost like God is testing this little group of believers, because it's going right to the final mark, isn't it? It can't get much later in the day. And Peter is still in prison as far as they understand, as far as they know. And they're really, really intensely praying. It's getting close to the dawn of the day when Peter will be on trial and probably be executed as well. So verse 7 says, now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, arise quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Peter was sleeping so deeply in the midst of all of this that the angel has to actually hit him to wake him up. That's the peace that he's got in the midst of this crisis. Okay? And we can bring some questions up about that. I'm sure we have later on. We can add to that, can't we? But verses 8 and 10, it says, the angel said to him, gird yourself up and tie on your sandals. And so he did. And he said to him, put on your garment and follow me. So he went out and followed him, and he did not know what was done by the angel was real, but he thought he was seeing a vision. And when they were past the first and the second guard post, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. Can you just imagine that? You know, Peter is still sort of drowsy, and he thinks this is a dream. And they how do they go past the guards? We don't know, but they go past two sets of guards, and the iron door just swings open in front of them. As I've said before, we've all been through automatic doors, haven't we? We know what it's like to go through a big door in a shop, and you go to it, and the door just opens, you know. But back 2,000 years ago, they never had things like that normally. But the iron gate of the prison just swings open, and they walk out. And Peter just thinks he's dreaming. Yeah, past the guards, through the gates, and he finds himself out in the street, and the angel departs. It's just, you know, even though we're Christians and we're believers, it's an incredible thing to believe, isn't it? You know, what God has done here, you know, to bring him out. And the whole operation is a piece of cake to God. You know, it's not anything fantastic for God to do. It's impossible for man, but for God it's just a piece of cake. It's just so simple, and it works so easily, you know. And all Peter has to do is follow instructions, put his shoes on and get his coat on and go. It's nothing to do with him at all. He plays no part in it. Probably he prayed before he went to sleep, but he was asleep when the angel arrived. But he's playing no part in it. People are praying for him, and the Lord is acting, and the Lord is working. So verses 11 to 5, look. And when Peter had come to himself, he said, "Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the Jewish people." So when he had considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked on the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer. And when she recognised Peter's voice, because of her gladness, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter stood before the gate. But they said to her, "You're beside yourself." Yet she kept insisting that it was so. So they said, "It's his angel." You know, so prayer is being made. I mean, we've probably all looked at this so many times. I'm sure we're quite familiar with it. But you know, prayer is going up, right, and it's being held by these group of Christians, really. You know, and you know, it's a reflection to me of what's happening in the world today. Because I believe in little places all around the world, there's Christians praying just as intently for other Christians who are facing what Peter faces. You know, there's 6 real countries where to be a Christian is a death sentence at the moment. And I'm sure there's Christians praying for their friends who face the death sentence. And we don't really reflect on that too much, do we, here? You know, it's too easy for us. But there's Christians who are losing their life on a day-to-day basis. And I may mention, my daughter is a researcher for Open Doors, and she's working on Nigeria at the moment. And she's told me the number of deaths there is unbelievable amongst Christians at the moment. You know, we should really have an intensity about us to pray for those Christians there. They're really up against it. And it's not just there, you know, North Korea and other countries as well. So, you know, there are Christians suffering, and just, you know, they're up against it like Peter and against this group of Christians who were praying for him. So maybe we need to think about that in our prayers. But, you know, what always tickles me, instead of believing that Peter is being released, they sort of suggest that it's his angel or it's his ghost that's at the door. They think he's already dead. And we think, well, they're a great bunch of faithful Christians, but they're not really believing that could possibly be Peter at the door, are they? You know, and it's such an incredible thing to happen, isn't it? You know, it really is. We'll just finish verse 16 and 19, and then we can chat about this a bit in a moment anyhow. It says this, "But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. They were utterly amazed that their prayers had been answered. But motioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, 'Go tell these things to James and to the brethren.' And he departed and went to another place. Then as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. But when Herod had searched for him and not found him, he examined the guards and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there." Now, Peter's deliverance actually cost the life of 16 soldiers. There's a sombre side to that as well, isn't there? There's uproar in the morning. you know, Herod and the Jews, they must have been aware of what was going on. They knew that Peter had been rescued from prison before, and now he's come out miraculously. He's out of prison again. There's no logical answer to it. They must see the hand of God in this, yet their hearts are hard and they refuse to submit to the will of God, really. The Jewish authorities, you know, are still stringent, and they're still, you know, maintaining a persecution of the Christians. They're not going to give in at all, you know. They refuse to soften their stance while the church is praying. I'll put here, Peter, as I said, the peace that came upon Peter is a peace that passes beyond understanding. We often talk about that, don't we? But wouldn't it, you know, sometimes, you know, we could have struggles and strife in life, can't we? Why don't we get others to pray for us, that we might have peace in the middle of that situation? We've got the example of Peter here, you know, on trial for his life probably in the morning, and yet he's got perfect peace. And yet as Christians, we often go through struggles and ups and downs, and we don't ask friends to pray for us. You know, we've got a huge resource there, haven't we? And God promises us his peace. We really should be sort of, you know, instead of trying to battle on, just get a friend and really pray for me. Will you pray with me? I need peace in my life at the moment. I need to sort out where I'm going. I need the Lord's help to do it. Let's just pray together. God gives us a great weapon and we don't use it. You know, we need to be aware of that, don't we? You know, we all have stresses. We all have concerns in life. You know, not one of us can say we never have anything like that. And yet God is just a prayer away. You know, so close to each one of us. You know, we're so reluctant to ask for his help sometimes. Paul says this in Ephesians 6:18. He says, "Hold me up in your prayers." That goes to show how important it was to Paul, right? It was important to Paul and the others. It must be important for us, and to have other Christians praying together. It shows how important really the prayer meeting is as well, I think. So we'll finish there for tonight, as far as in the Bible, and we'll discuss some questions, because I'm sure this little passage raises up quite a few, actually.